It's been a roller coaster ride for most African economies, with economic giants such as Nigeria battling its first recession and South Africa escaping credit rating downgrades by the skin of her teeth. Other oil-producing countries are not left out here with the plunge in commodity prices. To put all this into perspective, we're here to speak to the president of African Development Bank, Akinwumi Adesina, who took over a year ago. Looking back at your tenure, it's been a year at the helm of this institution. What has been the highs and trials thus far?
Well, first and foremost, it's a great honor to be elected to be the president of the African Development Bank. That's Africa's own bank. And when I took over this position, I knew right away that we had to do a number of things differently, obviously to build on all the achievements of the bank. First and foremost is that we had to put in place a strategy very quickly about the things that are transformative on the continent. I decided to have a focus on 5 major areas, and those areas are called the high fives of the bank. First is to light up and to power Africa. The other one is to feed Africa. The third one is to industrialize Africa. The fourth one is to integrate Africa. And the last one is to improve the quality of life of the people of Africa. As with any big, huge bureaucracy, you've got to actually get your strategies approved before you can actually move ahead. It takes us roughly about maybe 2 years to get one strategy developed and approved as a bank before you can move ahead. We developed 4 strategies and got them all approved within 6 months. Just tells you the speed at which we got our strategy on energy development approved, the strategy on agriculture to go forward approved, the strategy on industrializing Africa approved, and the strategy on improving the quality of life of the people of Africa approved. So that's really exciting for us.
This is barely a year this has been launched. Is this really attainable, and what are the prospects?
Well, when you take a look at how Africa needs to transform itself, there's no way that it can do it by doing everything in the world. We've selected the high fives as the top things that Africa needs to do. And what have we done that gives me the excitement that this is really working out well? Take the case of energy, to light up and power Africa. Africa today has huge amount of potentials in renewable energy. Lots of sunshine, lots of water, geothermal capacity, and Africa has no business being in the dark. But the key is you got to unlock that potential. You can't eat potential, you got to unlock that potential. So at the African Development Bank this year, we established what's called the Africa Renewable Energy Initiative. The goal is to develop, by 2020, 10 gigawatts of electricity. That's 10,000 megawatts of electricity by 2020, only from renewable energy.
Countries such as Nigeria, Angola have been the hardest hit by the plunge in commodity prices. What is AFDB doing to help these oil-producing countries to come out of this crisis?
The role of the bank, of course, is to provide counter-cyclical financial support for people. So if you're on a boat and somebody is sinking, you've got to make sure their head is above the water first before you can lecture them about how they have to swim all the way to the shore. And so in the case of Nigeria, as I said, Nigeria is just too big to fail. We can't have that. And South Africa's economy, by the way, also has been badly affected, as you see what has happened. So when you take economies like Nigeria and South Africa that account together for about 50% of the weighted GDP of the continent, that means that we've got to begin to do things differently. So the bank is providing counter-cyclical financial support. We provided $600 million to Nigeria, and that's going to, it's part of a 2-tranche approach to do $1 billion. And we're also looking to providing financial support as well for Angola as part of that as well. So this is part of what we do. But more than that, I think our support is to help them to diversify their economies, to diversify away from oil and to look into other high-valued non-oil commodities that they should be looking at. And also they have to also deepen their domestic resource mobilization.
Corruption is a vice that continues to plague the African continent. And in the fight against this corruption, AFDB has put in place an integrity fund. What are its objectives, and is there any success so far?
Corruption is not an African problem. Corruption is a problem globally where you have very weak institutions, where you have very weak regulations. Don't forget that it was corruption that actually created the 2008 financial crisis. it's quite worrying that you have roughly over $60 billion of illicit capital flows that actually leaves African continent. And some of that actually comes because of many reasons. You have weak institutions, you have lack of accountability systems, lack of monitoring and tracking a lot of these financial flows, which will actually be funding, in some cases, terrorist attacks in some countries. But also, you have another challenge with these illicit capital flows is that it's not often even the African countries themselves. You have huge multinational companies, corporations, that are the ones that are dealing, whether it's in oil and gas and minerals and metals. They have more lawyers than the entire country has. They have more accountants than an entire country will have. And in most cases, they will do what you would call the transfer pricing. They will do profit-based shifting, and so that they're counting their monies in different places and avoiding taxes. Generally, as the African Development Bank, we have zero tolerance for corruption. We have three instruments that allow us to do that. One, of course, is what we call the Africa Legal Support Facility. That Africa Legal Support Facility allows us to support African countries when they make deals, whether it's in the oil field or gas fields or whatever, so they can make the best deals without mortgaging away their future just because they got a good guy that wants to invest in them. And that's been working very well. The second thing that we do is we have what is called the Africa Natural Resources Center, which allows the countries to map and have a good quantitative information on what the resources they have really are. And I think this is really very, very important. And the third one that we have is what is called the Africa Integrity Fund. Now, that Africa Integrity Fund we're not looking to make money out of people doing bad stuff. But we find in a number of cases that in some few cases where companies have bidded for contracts and they've done the wrong stuff, of course, we're going to penalize them. And when we penalize them, we have a relationship with the World Bank and others to cross-bar them from doing businesses in other multilateral development finance institutions. But in addition to that, we slap fines on you. So those fines now come into a fund, which is called the Africa Integrity Fund. And the fund right now has about $54 million. And these monies will be used to support anti-corruption drive within countries, whistleblowing policies within countries, to also support judicial assistance within the country to be able to fight corruption.
Africa is described as having one of the youngest population, but 40% of its population between 15 and 24 years, and that it stands to benefit from this. But then the rate of unemployment, youth unemployment, is quite high. How is this affecting the continent's transformation growth? Africa is today the youngest continent in the world. You have the population of Africa today of young people, roughly about 480 million people. But if you go at 2050, that's likely going to be about over 840 million people. Now, that shouldn't really be a concern as long as the rate of unemployment is actually low, but it is not. And that's where the problem really is. What is supposed to be, in a way, demographic dividend for Africa is turning out to be, in fact, a crisis, a joblessness crisis among the youth. You've got roughly 13 million young people that come to the market every year looking for jobs in the labor market, but only 3 million of them get jobs. And over 33% of Africa's youth today are involved in wage employment. The rest of them, they're either not employed or they are underemployed. Of course, the devil, an idle hand is the devil's workshop. And so people get involved in antisocial activities, which is not actually very good. And so one of the things that we are doing at the bank is to address that. We've launched a program that's called Jobs for Africa's Youth. And the goal is to help countries in the private sector to create 25 million jobs over the next 10 years. And the sectors that we're looking at are agribusiness sector. We're looking also at small and medium-sized enterprises. We are also looking as well at the ICT industry, because young people have, we should be able to produce the likes of Zuckerberg and the likes of Bill Gates in Africa. Why not? In fact, just before this interview, I was just with a group of young people from International Institute of Tropical Agriculture, that's called Agripreneurs. Now, these are the young people that are going into agriculture as a business.
Africa spends $35 billion a year importing food. And yet, it needs to create jobs. And we need young people to go into agriculture as a business, change their mindset. And so these are going to be, in my view, the future millionaires and billionaires of Africa going into agriculture. Money, food business is the world's biggest business. And Africa has 65% of all the arable land left in the world to feed 9 billion people by 2050. We just launched an initiative with the European Investment Bank called Boost Initiative. The goal is to invest 263 million euros to support business incubation facilities for the businesses of young people, and also to have venture capital funds going into it and business accelerator support systems to turn the dreams and the aspirations of our young people into reality. Because I don't believe that the future of Africa's youth lies at the bottom of the Mediterranean Sea.
Going forward, how do you see Africa performing in light of the ongoing global economic challenges?
If you take a look at the growth rates, as I've said, Africa has been growing at 5%, for the last 10 years. Now, because of the decline of commodity prices, when we take a look at the growth prospects for Africa this year, Africa is growing about 1.7%, which is much, much, much lower. But all is not doom and gloom. Right now we have 15 countries that are growing at 5% to 6% and above. You take a look at Cote d'Ivoire, for example, which is growing at 8.5%. Look at Kenya, you look at DRC Congo, you look at Mozambique, and you look at Rwanda. All these countries are doing phenomenally well in a very, very difficult environment. So there's no doubt in my mind that African economies are quite resilient. So going forward, we project that Africa's growth is going to rebound to about 3.5% next year, and I think that you'll see growth pick up in other parts of the world. So there is no doubt in my mind that the fundamentals in Africa are actually quite strong. You have very, very stable economies. You have very good democracy, and transfer of power is going very well. You also have credible institutions. Don't forget that even now, Africa is the second fastest growing region in the world in terms of foreign direct investment. And so everybody has confidence in Africa. I certainly do have a lot of confidence in Africa. And I believe that as we support them to get out of the current tough situations that they face in terms of macroeconomic imbalances that they face, and we strengthen them to diversify their economies going forward and to address the fundamental issues of access to electricity and to invest more in infrastructure, and of course to get the best out of agriculture, which is what they have, to try and add value to it. There's no doubt in my mind that Africa will be, in the next 10 years, a global powerhouse, especially in agriculture and agribusiness. There's no doubt in my mind.
Thank you for speaking to Africanews.
Thank you.